This video is brought to you by Optics. We've loved our Panasonic Lumix GH5 since we bought it the day it became available more than 4 years ago, March 31st, 2017. It gave us what we needed that no other hybrid camera could at the time, and to this day, August 25th, 2021, it remains unmatched save for just one other camera. Just one. Sony's A7S III, with which I'm recording right now. That is, if your emphasis is not on playing around with 8K, but instead getting videos out the door on a regular basis at the upper end of usable image quality, refusing to accept the processing and storage overheads of 8K with little to no return in the compressed world of internet delivery. But the A7S III has something our GH5 does not, and that is why, deep into the pandemic, when our needs evolved, more than half a year after the A7S III was launched, we finally switched to the A7S III. Yet here I am, less than 3 months later, contemplating a switch back to Micro Four Thirds, or something else. And therein lies a tale. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant. Today I want to share with you a bit about our most recent gear purchase, and the fact that it is one of the very few times, all of them recent come to think of it, that I may undo it. Or not. But before I get into it, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor for this video, Optics. In an age of 20 frames per second burst rates on a little camera like the Sony RX100 Mark VII, let alone the 30 frames per second of Sony's A1, never mind the purported 120 frames per second burst rate of Nikon's recently caught in the wild Z9 prototype, if you are the kind of photographer who has to cull through literally thousands of images, say from a big single wedding, you are way beyond the point of using a single Lightroom screen. Forget about a contact sheet from which, for example, Life's editors picked the one image among just 4 captured by legendary photographer Alfred Eisenstadt to grace the cover of Life magazine for VJ Day, August 1945. Optics is the first tool I've seen outside of my iPhone to address this issue directly using AI. Working best with human faces, think portrait, fashion, or event photography from weddings to sports, even photojournalism, Optics automatically groups similar photos, selects a subset of those shots on the basis of parameters like sharpness, eyes open or closed, and smiles, parameters that you tweak, and then applies whatever metadata you'd like. It can also help you narrow the selection further with additional curation tools, I like to think of them, like focus highlighting, subject recognition, and fast previews. If this sounds like something that could make a big difference to your workflow, hop over to www.optics.app, that's .app, not .com, for a free 14-day trial. And if you use the discount code 3blindmen, you'll get an extra 2 weeks on top of that. Thanks, Optics, for making this video possible. Next, a 100% craven familial promotion. If you want to see the hands of a lifelong New Yorker on a giant billboard in New York, they are, in fact, my mother's hands. You should vote for this entry by my wife and partner in all things Claudia in a photography competition here. globalbillboardproject.com/vote/global billboard project contender Claudia Brownstone hyphens in between all of that. Feel free to give it a heart, but the most important thing is to click on the vote button just below it. My mother introduced me to photography. These hands have watered countless spider plants, balanced many cigarettes, played piano, written short stories, typed up impassioned arguments to the Queen's Public Library system for a good cause, and cut out zillions of newspaper clippings to send to her grandkids, and cooked 1 million briskets conservatively. Actually, I just lifted that last couple of paragraphs whole cloth written by one of my daughters. Just saying, 100% familial. Okay, as I said a moment ago, we've loved our GH5 for the last 4 years. We bought it specifically and most immediately for long-form interviews. 2017 was the year we did our 25-webisode Mariner East Hazardous Liquids Pipeline documentary. But it also became our A-cam for our commercial work and our daily driver for our YouTubes here. It was pretty good for street photography, too. The contrast detect only DFD autofocus, whip fast and sure for that purpose. I don't recall ever missing a shot because of its autofocus in that context. But the critical point is that at launch, it had a set of video capabilities that no other hybrid camera, not a single one, could match. I'm talking 4K, unlimited recording up to 60 frames per second. No overheating, full stop. Class-leading IBIS. A full flippy screen with excellent touch interface. An excellent EVF. It was already a 3.7 million dot unit back then. A full-sized HDMI port, the only kind of HDMI port that can provide frequent, worry-free connections to external monitors and recorders. Dual card slots, optional battery grip, very good preamps, and an XLR mic adapter, no wires required, making it a dottle to work with across all of our use cases with virtually no futzing. Usable ISO up to 12,800 in a pinch, though I almost always shoot at base ISO because I light. But it was also about the lenses. At first, it was about small, inexpensive, lightweight, fit-for-purpose glass like Sigma's 30mm 1.4 or Leica's DG Vario Element 12-62.8-4. Then it became about superb glass. Stunning, actually. First Leica's DG Vario Element 50-200 2.8-f4, and then Leica's DG Vario Sumilux 10-25 1.7. With these two lenses alone, our video kit was complete, and remained that way until, well, hold that thought. The 50-200 is tiny compared to its full-frame equivalents like Sony's excellent 100-400 G Master, but at $1,700, especially for a micro four thirds lens, it is not inexpensive, although it is $700 less expensive than that G Master. It offers brilliant image quality for our purposes, 4K video, with excellent build quality and weather sealing, and is easily hand-holdable out to the full-frame equivalent field of view of 400 millimeters. But the real deal sealer was the arrival of the $1,800 10-25 1.7. Not inexpensive either, and definitely not small even by full-frame standards, but for our video work, the 1.7 has been just about perfect. Pretty much an ideal focal range, tack sharp across that range and across the field, same light gathering capacity of a full-frame 1.7, with the depth of field of a full-frame 3.4. Quick to autofocus, and virtually no focus breathing. No focus breathing, no focus breathing. Yes, the GH5 is bulkier and heavier than Sony's A7 series, but I didn't care. The Sony wasn't the relevant comparison for me. My bogey for size, weight, and handling was my much bigger and heavier Canon 5D Mark II, which the GH5 handily blew out of the water as a video instrument, even as it shared much of the Canon's biomorphic feel in hand. The GH5's only significant weakness, as far as I was concerned, it didn't have Canon-level dual-pixel autofocus, but again, I didn't really care. I had no problem using manual focus for interviews or YouTube videos, made dead easy because of Panasonic's class-leading app for remote control and monitoring, Wi-Fi or tethered, with the added benefit of a touch interface on my iPhone or iPad when I used them rather than my laptop. But okay, there were a couple of times I wished the autofocus were better, but I lived with it. No big deal. Especially after the arrival of the G9, which pretty much took care of that, again, for what we did. To my surprise, it was perfectly adequate for a behind-the-scenes on-set short done at night with better autofocus, better IBIS, and better color than our GH5. Remember, too, that in 2017, Sony's video-centric hybrid, the A7S Mark II, didn't have phase detect autofocus either, didn't have a flippy screen, tilty only, didn't do 60p, didn't do 10-bit, not that I minded the absence of 10-bit, we still shoot 8-bit 420. The Sony's IBIS was inferior, the EVF was inferior, the micro HDMI port was inferior, the weather sealing was inferior, the ergonomics and menu system were inferior, and in the real world, it offered no better dynamic range than the GH5, the utility of S-Log gated by the limitations of 8-bit only recording, and the fact that I simply refused to incur the post-processing overhead. It also was not as well-rounded as the GH5 as a hybrid camera, with only 12 megapixels available for stills. Never mind that today's A7S III still only sports 12 megapixels on the one hand, and still doesn't have all of the original GH5's video-specific functions, from shutter angle, which I really like and use all the time, to waveform monitor and more on the other. As I recall, the GH5's DFD was better than the A7S II's contrast detect only for stills. At the time of the GH5's launch, the A7 II's price had dropped from the original $3,000 to $2,400. Today, the A7S III is more than twice the price of the GH5 Mark II. Hold that thought. Back then, the best Sony lenses, I'm not even talking long telephotos, were big and expensive, and they still are. Which is not to say that with its extended high ISO of 409,600, the A7S III didn't wipe the floor with the GH5 in low light. But as too many people forget or don't know, the A7S II's two-stop light advantage is all but wiped out by the two-stop aperture advantage of the GH5 for a given depth of field. And as was the case when I bought the GH5, dynamic range craters for all cameras as one ratchets up the ISO, never mind the noise, though. ISO 409,000 whatever on the A7S II is ugly. Really ugly. It's ugly as stop or 3 below that. To repeat then, the GH5 was a no-brainer for us because no other camera fit our needs nearly as well, nor was as keenly priced until the pandemic hit. I'm not going to rehash our personal COVID-19 stories nor our losses. This is not the time nor place to get into it. But I will say that the pandemic forced us, like so many others, to face a new reality and make adjustments to our business. Any thought of new documentary work, our passion when it comes to video, went out the window. Commercial video work, out the window. Our on-location B-roll for our YouTube channel, out the window. But to offer an adjacent metaphor, one door closes, another opens. One-on-one live video mentoring sessions gradually became a significant and very psychologically rewarding revenue stream. Hop over to www.3bmap.com/booking to learn more. Real-time presentations to organizations became another rewarding opportunity. And as sponsorships picked up, as you might have noticed, the need to become more efficient in video production, specifically around B-roll, grew. All of which, unfortunately, highlighted the GH5's lackluster video autofocus performance. It just did not work reliably. And either wasted a lot of time as I tried to make it work, spending half an hour once after I'd recorded the A-roll, that's what put me over the edge, or going down into the Bat studio to film separate B-roll altogether. Which, to be fair, does have the advantage of higher production values, but hey, time to make some new trade-offs. I briefly considered Canon's EOS R6. The autofocus just may be the best I've ever seen, but the camera otherwise fell so far short of the GH5, from poor heat management to short and unpredictable recording limit, and always weak link in the chain micro HDMI port, a relative paucity of video tools, and nothing but big expensive glass given our objectives, with no third-party native lens mount ecosystem, that I moved on. I bought but returned in quick succession a Fujifilm X-C4 and then a Sony A7C I'd intended to serve as an adjunct to our GH5 because they were suboptimal for long-form video, and I realized I didn't want two different mounts for my video work on top of a third mount for my personal work. I'd been one of the first to review an A7S III, and at the time was impressed how Sony had systematically addressed just about every single weakness identified in the A7S II. Unlimited 10-bit 422 internal recording up to 120 frames per second. 16-bit raw external recording up to 4.2K 60p. These all handily bested our GH5. Profoundly better heat management than the A7S II, but in my tests, still not quite as good as the GH5's. State-of-the-art hybrid phase detect autofocus with real-time IAF and video. Yes, please. After 6 years of waiting, finally, Sony gave the A7S series a flippy screen. And then they added dual SD CFast card slots, a crazy spec, crazy good 9.44 million dot EVF with 25mm eye relief and 0.9x magnification. Gyroscopic data for eliminating shake in post-production, a full-sized HDMI port, better weather sealing than the Mark II, and of course, Sony's already best-in-class C battery. Which, while impressive from both a technical and strategic business perspective, I was able to brutally, honestly, tell myself gave us nothing that we didn't have or needed in the previous 4 years. But now, in mid-2021, with our new use cases, the autofocus of the A7S III promised us the one thing we needed that I hadn't needed before in what I regarded basically as a full-frame next-gen GH5 sans 8 megapixels. In other words, there was finally a camera that could replace our Micro Four Thirds system by doing everything we'd previously needed, plus the one new thing we needed now. No other camera out there today can do this. Panasonic's own S5 comes close, but still hasn't quite hit the mark with its video autofocus, which is just a little bit heartbreaking, really. When Sony announced their $600 50mm f2.5 and I tried it out, I was very impressed. Very sharp and tasty, very small and lightweight. I thought I'd found the combination that would work for me 99% of the time in the Batcave or on a gimbal without having to pony up another $2,000 for a 24-70 2.8 G Master. That just didn't work for me anyway. So I bought them both, camera and lens, and that should have been that. Of course, it wasn't. Not only was the A7S III's autofocus not perfect, the product showcase mode of the Sony's ZV series is actually better for our needs, the camera themselves not so much, but the 52.5, just like the more expensive but otherwise superb Zeiss 55 1.8, focus breathes like a dragon, which hadn't mattered when I'd tested it because I'd only tested it for stills. Suddenly, that fact mattered a lot. I was left with a great video camera with autofocus far superior to the GH5, yet not capable of fully implementing what I really wanted. That is, the ability to hold the product anywhere in the frame as long as it was closer to the camera than my face, meaning I could still use the teleprompter and have the focus switch quickly, smoothly, and consistently between the two. Which it just did. I give up. Worse, for the first time, focus breathing for me was just plain ugly, teleprompter visible or not. Every time I saw myself while editing stick a product in front of my face and saw that focus breathing, I'd cringe. You see what I mean? I haven't forgotten my Edward Demings, but I don't care again. If I have to spend hours editing my work, it had better look great to me. Worst of all, sometimes, the combination of the camera and this particular lens would back focus when I shot wide open at f2.5, leaving my eyes or face ever so slightly out of focus. It dawned on me that I was now looking at spending more money for a better controlled lens, maybe Sigma's 24-70 2.8, which might or might not solve the autofocus problem. Probably not. All the while, the Vario Summilux 10-25 1.7 seemed to look at me forlornly from across the room and whisper, "How could you ever leave me?" Which is why I decided to attach the Vario Summilux to the new GH5 Mark II loaner we still have in-house with a new set of eyes. I did the same shove-it-in-front-of-my-face version of Product Showcase. That is what the A7S III can do for me 100% reliably as things stand today. And lo and behold, this combination, relaxing my previous restriction that I'd be able to place a product anywhere in the frame, worked better, all things considered, than our new A7S III with 52.5 in the same mode. In the end, this is a bit of a cautionary tale on gear acquisition and a business case study. It got to the point that I needed to do something. I was willing to pony up for a reduction in anxiety, actually, and time spent in capture. I'd fashioned an ROI heuristic that made sense to me, and I could, at some point in the future, take what I calculated to be a modest transaction cost, to switch to something better. Yet, I find that it is my aesthetic sensibility that urges me to move sooner than a strict dollars and cents accounting would suggest is appropriate, or just look a little bit harder at what I'm actually doing. As a business case study at the larger corporate level? Well, while Sony has relentlessly pushed the technology envelope with one camera after another, one lens after another in rapid succession, Panasonic has moved much more slowly and incrementally. One could attribute this to the original GH5 being such a fully formed breakthrough product at launch, while simultaneously asserting that Sony's A7 series started from much farther back and had to become a perfect example of what one might call an accelerated version of Kaizen. Alternatively, one could argue that describing Panasonic the way I just did is completely wrong, given that they created once again a fully formed, this time full-frame camera system in the same time period as they continued to develop their Micro Four Thirds system. Fair enough. A tremendous accomplishment in and of itself. Both systems are superb in almost all ways, save the common Achilles heel of video autofocus. Thus, it may be that what we are looking at has more to do with Sony's core competence in sensors, which are inextricably linked now to autofocus, Panasonic's decision not to pursue, or perhaps unsuccessfully pursue, sensor competence as well. Remember Panasonic's joint venture with Tower Jazz, which it exited a year or 3 ago, and a strategic decision on autofocus taken by each company at a critical juncture half a decade ago. Sony went all in on hybrid phase detect, while Panasonic bet instead on contrast detect only, depth from defocus. Of course, one could just say Sony's crystal ball was better than Panasonic's, committing to full frame 5 years before Panasonic did. But however you think about it, global industry business case or one tiny YouTube channel's tug between ROI and aesthetic sensibilities, what's most interesting to me is that both come down to this: intent and execution. This video was made possible by Optics. Visit them at www.optics.app and use the discount code 3blindmen for an extended 1-month free trial. Thanks, Optics. If you like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, join the conversation below, because this is an incredible audience. If you'd like a copy of our Streets of New York, the book, head over to www.3bmep.com/books. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one video session with me for a portfolio review, explore or hone your artistic voice, select gear, and more, sign up at www.3bmep.com/booking. Finally, consider supporting our work by using our no-cost-to-you affiliate links down below, picking up some official 3 Blind Men and an Elephant swag at 3bmep.threadless.com, sending coffee money via PayPal, or best of all, join us as a patron over at Patreon. However you choose to support us, as always, we thank you for it.